Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. It's good to see everyone still up. And I thought a good subject for a talk going into the new year would be on forgiveness and letting go and humility. There's a story of a monk at Wat Pah Nanachat, the International Forest Monastery, and he got into an argument with another monk, and it almost came to blows. And just when they were about to break out into something very unbecoming for monastics, this one monk dropped to the ground and just bowed deep and put his head to the floor in a full bow. And I mean, what do you do if you're the other monk in that case, you know? And yet this motion of humility, of forgiveness. There's a woman who was at a recent retreat with us, and she was talking about a relative of hers who held political views very different than her own, and just wondering how this person could possibly be this way. And just I think actually it was more to do with their dynamic as a family, and just exasperated by the stubbornness of this person, their difficulty. And how do you forgive? How do you let go of something like that? And the reflection I thought most helpful was, if we, with all the resources we have, with all these teachings, these brilliant, lucid trainings from the Buddha, have such trouble taming our own hearts, how can we not be forgiving for those who don't have these teachings if they fall short of exactly the standards we hope to hold them to in our most unfair moments? And the idea that forgiveness is a mixture of khanti, the Buddhist word for patience, or as Longpo Sumedho says, peaceful coexistence with the unwished for. And the agent noun of khanti is kantar, and it's an elephant. A mixture of khanti and an understanding of conditionality. We are so unfair with conditions. We trace back how one person spoke to us a certain way, or how they treated us when we were a child and they were a parent. And yet we stop there, and we don't go back farther to what formed them when they were a child. Where do those conditions stop? And how far back do you have to go before you can find forgiveness? One of the most beautiful images, I think, for loving kindness practice is just imagining the person as a 5-year-old and holding their hand, and then on their deathbed and holding their hand there too. And just this idea, there was someone in our community who was acting in ways many of us could not understand, and then we learned sometime later from people who'd met this person in a separate environment that they'd just been through serious head trauma and were having trouble performing basic tasks, let alone merging perfectly into a social environment like the one we expected them to. And just the shift in perception, so immediate, from exasperation, confusion, to just utter compassion. And to understand that in a Buddhist worldview, all unskillful action comes from ignorance. We all do not understand how best we might achieve true happiness for ourselves, and yet that is all we want. And to know then that in that sense, we all have that same wound to the head or the heart, whatever you want to think of it as. And if you really knew where someone's difficulty came from, where the actions they are perpetrating towards you or people you love were rooted in, that there's no one you could not forgive. Because we've all had that experience of being exasperated by someone, and then suddenly we learn what's going on at home or what happened when they were a kid, and oh, of course. And the heart is big enough for that. And this temptation with loving kindness and forgiveness practice to send it out towards others, towards those we're angry at. And to ignore that often good metta practice requires agility and wisdom, because so often metta is not this bright, glittery dust we sprinkle over people in our minds. It's just a humble human turning towards the bruising of our own hearts. And often with anger, the right motion of loving kindness is not towards the person you feel angry towards, but rather just towards yourself and how much it hurts to be angry. It hurts so much to be angry. It burns. I remember Eckhart Tolle in The Power of Now. He talks about being on the subway and seeing this woman just mumbling to herself. And he walked out of the train with her, and they were walking out together, and she just turned left into this kind of government building. She was just a normal worker, but just was kind of monologuing with herself. And how many times have we all caught ourselves just sounding completely, speaking to ourselves and this imaginary person, and just that sense of constant burning. We don't want that coal in our heart, and yet there it is. And so how do we learn to put that down? At these transition points between one year and the next, one life and the next, how do we let go finally? And it's a mix. There's this recollection of conditionality, of where another person's suffering came from. But then there's also a faith that if you do let go, there's something, a hidden majesty on the other side of that letting go. So often the conflict or the argument is propped up in our minds because there's something we don't want to lose, a certain power, solidity, stability. And to know that if you bow, if you're the monk that bows, or the monastic that bows, that there's a strength there. I remember going to see a teacher in Thailand, actually the teacher I ordained with a friend from high school. And we went, and I was bowing to him, and my friend said, I bow for no man. And in a Western context, that sounds very noble, like I bow for no one. But then you see what it looks like when someone really bows, and you realize that is the proper orientation of a human being. Because we all bow to something, whether we acknowledge it or not. Maybe it's the giant altar of the bed. What do we put highest up in the house? It's the TV or the liquor or something. But we all bow to something, and if we don't think we're bowing to anything, then we're bowing to ourselves. And so all this humility is making explicit and finding strength there with our heads pressed to the stone. And this is the meaning, I think, of the Christian concept of grace, is that when you let go, when you pass through the first and second noble truth of stress, suffering, and letting go of that what you find on the other side is a majesty, a spaciousness, a peace. And that if you exist long enough through that raw wound of the self that feels like it's right, it's been wronged, that vibrates with that intensity, if you just wait and hold still long enough, on the other side of that, there's a completely other spacious place and perspective. We have a community member who says if he thinks one thing to himself 3 times for certain, then he knows that he's wrong. So or it's wrong somehow. And we interviewed a teacher recently who said, greed pretends it's your friend, anger pretends it's necessary, delusion pretends it doesn't exist. The Buddha talked about 3 kinds of mind. He talked about a mind like a pustule, where when it's pressed, it spews pus. And this is the person who's, when spoken to with unpleasant words, becomes angry quickly and spews words back at their attacker. Then there's a mind like a lightning flash, which is someone who for a moment has seen the deathless, nibbana awakening. And then there's a mind like a diamond, which is an arahant's mind, flawless. And like, what an analogy, you know. The Buddha gave us 3 means, or the means of dispelling resentment, where he talks about one dispels resentment towards one impure in speech, impure in bodily conduct. No, impure in speech, but pure in bodily conduct, as a monastic would come to or a man kneading cloth would come to a piece of dirty cloth on the road, and using their feet to tear off the dirty section would pick up only the good. One looks on, dispels resentment towards a person impure in verbal conduct, but pure in bodily conduct, as a person needing water would come to a pond covered in algae and carefully sweeping the algae out of the way would cup the water to their lips and drink. Even so, one looks to the good. One dispels resentment towards one impure in verbal conduct, impure in bodily conduct, but with occasional moments of clarity and mindfulness, as a person in need of water would come to a hoofprint filled with a little water, and bending their lips to that hoofprint so as not to disturb the silt would drink just enough to sate their thirst. And one dispels resentment towards a person impure in bodily conduct, impure in speech, and without occasional moments of clarity, as one would look on a person wandering, starving through the desert, saying, may they not come to misfortune, may they find help. One looks at one pure in bodily conduct and pure in speech, as a man in search of water would look to an oasis, a cool pond, and bathing, drinking his fill, lie down on the bank. So notice the motions. I only saw this when I read the Pali, but the motion of the person bending their hands into the water and cupping their hands to their lips, it's Anjali. That's actually the word, making Anjali. And what's the motion of the person who's bending down to the hoofprint? It's a full bow. So what does it mean to kind of bend for once? And the most powerful, and who have we not done that with? The Buddha talks about this enormous debt we owe our parents. And to know that often in families, this is where the sankharas manifest. Brutal storms of sankhara. Many people here probably rightly have taken distance from their families. And yet, as children, in the Buddhist view, it is always our duty to be on the lookout for that moment where you could reconnect, where it wouldn't be damaging. We have a debt of gratitude to pay. So maybe forgiveness doesn't look like deciding to go to your family's house next Christmas, but what about sending a bouquet of flowers twice a year, or a box of chocolates? What about a phone call? Or what about much more? What about just telling someone, how much in your family, what they've meant to you? even just writing a letter. In Thailand, the children will wash the hands of their elders once a year and ask forgiveness. And just to say that I used to every year be in this, we used to go to this hostel in Canada, and we sang the song by my favorite artist at the time, called Don't Enter This Year with an Empty Heart. And we also ran through the streets like hitting pots and pans together, so we aren't doing that tonight. But what would it mean to not enter this year with an empty heart? Or rather, to empty our heart of some of those splinters which have been left. And to understand that life is very short, that we don't have much longer. The Buddha compared this human birth to a drop of dew on a blade of grass. Touch this truth like a sage, he said. Practice. When one comes across someone in great misfortune, one should think, I too have experienced just this sort of thing in the course of this long, long time. When one comes across someone who's come across good fortune, one should think, I too have just experienced just this sort of thing in this course of this long, long wandering. It's enough to become dispassionate, enough to stop swelling the cemeteries. And this view that we've all been each other's mothers and brothers and sisters and children, that everyone here, this is the Tibetan practice of remembering everyone has been your mother in the Buddhist worldview. And if you don't believe in rebirth, that's just fine. But can you hold that deeper truth that the type of restraint and love we talk about in Buddhism, it's not a coldness that you come to with restraint. It's stopping our fixation on one point and allowing the gaze to widen to hold all beings, the whole catastrophe, so much suffering in people's lives, and yet such compassion available, if you see that truly. One of our teachers, Ajahn, said the proper expression on a Buddha image should be compassion and the sense of equanimity. And equipoise, it's not cold. It's gentle, it's loving, it's just understanding we're all in this together. In Thailand, whenever they greet people in a monastery, they'll say, hello, brothers and sisters in birth, aging, and death. And it sounds morbid at first, but honestly what it's doing is just pointing to the root wound that we all share. And that this is where grace and forgiveness all come from. And that at this juncture, this liminal place in the year where darkness begins to give way again to light, can we really put down those old resentments, those old wounds, those old stories, and trust that when we open our hands and hold it still, quell our palsied shaking, that a gentle light begins to manifest slowly, and that burning can transform into something sweet and cool and spacious. So wish all of you the blessings of a new year with a heart empty of anger, empty of ill will, full with care, and hopefully voices which aren't too hoarse after another 54 rounds of ETP So.
หันธรรมยังธรรมคถาสาธุการังธดามเสสาธุสาธุสาธุอนุโมทามิ
For those of you staying up all night, this